Now, kicking off today's event is Dr. Michael Walden, who is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor and Extension Economist at NC State. He is also a member of the Graduate Economics Faculty with the Poole College of Management. Dr. Walden will take a deep dive into the future of jobs in North Carolina and the impact of COVID-19. Dr. Walden?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. The technology is working. I've had a lot of experience with Zoom and other virtual meeting programs over the last several months. It looks like this is going to be our future for down the road, maybe even into the spring. Thank you for inviting me to talk about the future of jobs in North Carolina. Obviously an extraordinarily important topic, regardless of where we are, good times, bad times, challenging times. I think we obviously put the latter characteristic on what's happening right now. And what I want to do, if we can advance the slide, go to the next slide, please. What I want to do is look at several topics. One, standard job forecast. The Federal Department of Labor actually puts out very detailed job forecasts for each state. They don't do this every year, they about every 5 years. And I'm going to show you what they forecasted a couple years ago for the next 10 years and then make some comments about that. Second topic, disrupting forces. One of my themes is going to be that we already had in our economy several trends that are going to continue to affect the labor force and the kinds of jobs that we will see. Many of these forces, we don't really know how they're going to manifest themselves. One thing I think we do know, sliding into the third topic, is that the virus, COVID-19, has probably accelerated several of these forces as well as added some new ones. And so that's going to make the job future, I think, more uncertain, but I'm going to try to at least highlight what I think might be some trends. And then lastly, implications of the future job market, obviously for those working in the job market, for workers, but also for policymakers. I mean, policymakers have a great deal to do about this. Those policymakers at the state level, those policymakers at our universities and community colleges, even down to K through 12. Those are the folks that help prepare, or at least provide the resources to help prepare people for the future job market. And I think that they are going to be crucial, absolutely crucial, perhaps more crucial than they have been, at least in my recent memory, and I'm now pushing that magic 70 years old. So I'm going to end, and I think that's an appropriate place to end my presentation. And if we do have time at the end, I will say a few things about COVID-19. I'm actually serving on a group. It's called the North Carolina Economic Recovery Group. We meet virtually every other week with the governor. And so I have been obviously following that very, very closely, participating in that. I don't have any breaking news to give you, but I might be able to give you some insights from those meetings. And the governor has actually encouraged us to share information and insights with various groups. So you are a very important group, so I want to try to do that. Next slide, please. The next couple of slides are very, very busy, and I'm not going to go through all these numbers, and I'm not going to expect you to digest these now. If you get a copy of the slide set, which it's in the public domain, so you can via the chamber, or just email me if that's you're better able to do that. But these are the highlights in this slide and the two following. These are the highlights from that model that the federal government uses to predict jobs, and this is at the North Carolina level. So these are the changes in jobs in the various sectors that I have listed here, and actually the model goes into much finer tuning. So I've not given you all 500 plus job categories, but I've given you the major categories. And so you'll see on the left-hand side the name of the job area. Then you'll see a number, and that number is the predicted change in jobs in North Carolina in that area. And then you'll see a letter. And the letter is either L, M, or H. And that letter stands for the formal educational requirements to have a job in that area. So L means a lower level of education. Oftentimes, high school is all that's needed. M means middle. So clearly high school, maybe community college, maybe at least some exposure to college, if not a college degree. And H is the highest, certainly college degree, and usually something beyond a bachelor's degree. So those are what those letters indicate. And let me just take a brief opportunity to go down some of these, and I've listed these incidentally from the top to bottom, where the top category, in this case, food prep and service, is the sector that will generate the most jobs, and then they go down in declining order in terms of jobs. And I already see a typo at computer and math operators, so I'll mention that as we go down. So for example, looking at food prep and service, this is an occupation where you don't need high levels of formal education. And when I say that, please do not interpret that with any kind of judgment on, well, people who only stop there, they should have gone further. No, every job is valuable. People have their own circumstances, how much formal education they want to have. I actually have a very fond memories of that job category, because that's where I actually had my first paying job at McDonald's. And I believe it was 1966 or 67 when I started for an hour, $1 an hour. And so that was in the food prep and service. Just a little aside, they started me on the grill. And they found that I was better when the manager gauged some things about me. He thought I was better to serve people at the counter. And those are the days, I might remind people, where we didn't have cash registers that automatically made the change. We had a cash register that simply held cash. And so I had to not only add up what people bought, add up the total price, but then I had to make change. And the manager found I was pretty good at that. So that's where I started my career, serving people at the window and making change. So almost 50,000 jobs predicted there. Healthcare specialists, and these are people at the top end of the healthcare area. 40,000. Sales, moderate educational requirements, 31,000. And then down the line, I will point out a typo. If you look at about 8 spaces down, computer and math operators, that should be 21,786. I'm not sure how a 4 got in there, but I will correct that. And if we go to the next slide, I just want to finish these out. Next slide, please. And you can see going on down the line, building and ground maintenance, a little shy of 19,000. Again, those are occupations where high school degree is probably fine. A lot of physicality involved there. I might say my wife is a big-time gardener. Every square inch of our third of an acre here in East Raleigh has a plant in it, no grass, and I'm still engaged in building and ground maintenance because I do all the heavy lifting for her. She is the designer. If we go down to the bottom, you can see there are a couple of job segments where it's predicted that, and I actually can't see the lower one. Let's see. Okay, now I can. Where it's predicted that we're going to have losses: farming, loss of 91,000 people, and production, read that, manufacturing, a loss of 5,000. And I should quickly say that doesn't necessarily mean that farming is contracting or manufacturing is contracting in terms of production, because we know in both of those areas we're going to continue to eat. And in fact, farming in North Carolina is a very important sector in our export market. And we're also going to continue to make things in our country and in our factories. The reason we're not needing as many workers there is because of the improvement in worker productivity, primarily matching workers with advanced technology and machines. And in fact, that's been the trend in both farming and manufacturing for several decades. Yes, we have lost some manufacturing capacity to foreign competitors, but we still continue to manufacture things. In fact, nationally, we actually have manufactured more output in recent years than ever before. Now the composition has changed, and you look no further than North Carolina to know that. We used to be leaders in manufacturing of clothing and textiles, furniture, et cetera. Those have all shrunk, but we've added, for example, food processing. We have the largest food processing plant in the world in Tar Heel, North Carolina. We've obviously added pharmaceuticals. We've added technology big time. So the composition of that manufacturing certainly has changed over time. And if I can jump ahead just a little bit, it's going to be very interesting, I think, to watch as a result of COVID-19, if we actually see somewhat of a renaissance in our manufacturing sector as for two reasons. One, I think the virus has exposed our vulnerability as a country to being dependent upon foreign countries for the production of many medical products. I can recall, this is probably 4 or 5 months ago, when I forget what we needed, but we needed some kind of a medical input that was crucial in fighting COVID-19. And this was a product that largely we had been acquiring from India. And so the press reported that the president got on the phone with Prime Minister Modi, and apparently there was some initial reluctance there because obviously India and was facing the increases in COVID-19. And in fact, they're still having a big problem with cases rising. But we were able to negotiate a deal with India to get those supplies here. But I think we have come to the conclusion that we don't want to be in that situation if we have another pandemic like we're enduring now. So I would not be surprised to see there be rethinking and an actually encouragement of some of the foreign production of medical supplies to come back here to the US. The other thing I wouldn't be surprised to learn or see is that companies who are dependent upon foreign countries for inputs in whatever they're making, we saw the problem there before we got the virus. Obviously, it started, I think most experts would say it started in China. And China shut down for a while. You remember Wuhan province, where a lot of their manufacturing goes on, was shut down. And so companies here in the US, including in North Carolina, who depend upon those inputs being made and shipped from Wuhan couldn't do it, couldn't have them. And so I think the supply lines will be rethought too by a number of people. All right, next slide, please. If you add up all of those occupations and the numbers associated with them that require the various levels, the 3 different levels of educational training, formal educational training, here are the percentages you get. Based on these forecasts from 2017 to 2026 for North Carolina, the forecast from the US Department of Labor is that the additional jobs created over that time period, 37% of them will require higher levels of education. So this is at least a college degree, if not a graduate degree. 28% will require a medium level of education, certainly a high school degree, but oftentimes a college, at least a bachelor's degree. And then 35% will require the lower level of education, usually no more than a high school degree. And those numbers match up with actually what has been going on. If you look at the past, I've actually done a couple of research projects on this specifically for North Carolina, where the good news has been that the jobs that we've been creating in North Carolina, and if you divide them into these 3 categories, the largest percentage have been high-paying jobs. That's the good news. The bad news is in terms of pay, and again, I don't want to downgrade any job, the importance of any job. Don't read anything into this from my verbiage. But in terms of just pay, we want obviously workers to have more pay. The second largest category would be those needing only a lower level of education. And in the middle, which you can sort of translate middle class, is the third. And that's obviously been contributing to one of the issues in the country, and that is the increasing income inequality, where we were seeing the difference between those working at the high end of the income spectrum and those working at the low end of the income spectrum widening. And part of the reason for that is the middle, that great middle. Jobs there are not growing as fast as we have seen in the past. All right, next slide. Now, should you take all those numbers I presented you and run with them and say, well, we know exactly where the jobs are going to will be created in North Carolina in the next roughly next 6 years. These numbers do come out with a lag because of the time and effort required in gathering the numbers, et cetera. Do we know exactly where the jobs are going to be? And so we can just take those, we can take those results to our community colleges, we can take those results to our great universities and say, here's the kind of training we need. Here we know exactly how many folks we're going to need to be trained to be in these slots, and we'll call it a day and we can go home. Well, the answer is obviously no. And I think the answer would have been no even without COVID-19. Now, that doesn't make these forecasts useless. I think these forecasts, and these are done by very, very competent economists who work for the federal government, spend a lot of time looking at trends, et cetera. So I don't want to throw them out or comment negatively about them. These are very good numbers. They do give us, I think, a benchmark of where we think we were going at the time they were done. But we always have in the background these trends that are going on that are very difficult to predict. They're very difficult to predict their size. And then you lay on top of that COVID-19, which I think it goes without saying, they have the COVID-19 and the reactions to COVID-19 and the forecast of how our economy will change due to COVID-19 has placed another layer of uncertainty on top of this. When we look at people as workers, people have two major characteristics. One is the physical aspects of people. People have physical capabilities. My late father was a carpenter for 40 years, very, very hard work. I can remember when I got of an age where I could understand, he said, you've got to go to, Mike, you got to go to college. You just got to go to college, got to get a degree. You don't want to do what I'm doing. It's hard work. He enjoyed his work, but it was extremely hard work. I think he retired when he was 62, not because he didn't wanted to, but he just couldn't do it. He couldn't bend down, couldn't squat down. The knees went. I'm actually experiencing some of that now at age 70. So there's a physicality here, and we do see technology, and again, this technology was out there before COVID-19, but it's going to continue and maybe even accelerated, where we're developing machines and technology to replace some of the physical contributions that humans do. Give you a couple of examples. One related to my father. He's been gone now for decades, but I could imagine his reaction if he was listening to this presentation, maybe he is, that there have now been developed for several years. I think they're mainly used in Scandinavia for some reason, maybe because of the cold weather. Bricklaying machines that can actually lay brick, something my dad did a lot of. We have automated sweepers, for example, well, my wife and I have one of those. We call it Robbie, Robbie the robot that goes around and cleans the carpets. And those are increasingly being used, for example, in commercial buildings. We have not just the old kind of lawnmower that I would push when we did have grass. As I told you, we now have plants and bushes everywhere. But there are now automated lawnmowers I've seen advertised recently, battery powered, that you can just put out there. I'm not sure how you tell it where to go. Maybe it just goes where the grass is. And something that I want to share this example with you, something that really caught my eye. When I mentioned earlier that North Carolina has a very large and very important meat processing sector. That's in part tied to the fact that we are now, in terms of agriculture, a meat kind of agriculture, whereas when I came here in the late 70s, joined the faculty, we were a crops agriculture led by tobacco. Now we're a meat agriculture led by hogs and poultry, et cetera. And we are one of the leading hog producers, and so it makes sense that we have meat processing plants that process those hogs or those chickens, et cetera. You tend to want to have the growers and the processors in fairly close physical proximity, and we have the largest meat. I think it's a hog processing plant in Tar Heel, North Carolina. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with that. I can remember decades ago when I was on an extension mission in southeast North Carolina. I was driving through Bladen County, and I saw on the horizon, Bladen County is pretty flat, very rural. And Bladen, I saw ahead of me this what looked like some kind of a top, obviously top of a building, and there was nothing else around there except fields. I thought to myself, I wonder what that is. And this was before I knew. And as I got closer and closer, that structure became more and more prominent. And then when I got there, I mean, I was just amazed how large it was. And that was obviously the meat processing plant there in Tar Heel. So we are having a great deal of, I'm back to my example. What I want to share with you was we have had, and I think you know this, not only here in North Carolina, but around the country, some very significant outbreaks of COVID-19 in meat processing plants. And that's caused a great deal of concern, not just because of the people working there, but because of the fact that we still need to eat. I obviously need to eat, you need to eat, and that's an important part of the food chain. Takeaway from that, at least that I said publicly, and this was about 4 or 5 months ago when the COVID was starting, one of the takeaways was that, well, I said that I think probably down the line, this is going to cause a great deal of effort to get automation, more automation into the meat processing plants. This is exposing a problem in meat processing plants that people have to work closely. Even if they mask up, et cetera, you're working fairly closely. Almost on an assembly line type situation. And I predicted then that, well, at some point in the future, we're probably going to have robots or technology that's doing a lot of the work that people are doing in those plants. About a month ago, guess what? I pick up a national newspaper, I forget which one, and there's an article about some meat processing plant in the Midwest had already introduced automated robots that do that work. And so that tells you how COVID-19 is, I think, accelerating many of these trends and really makes those forecasts that I gave you very questionable. All right, the second work trait that people have besides their physicality is their ability to assess issues, make decisions, solve problems, what we call cognitive ability. And when the latest round, and I'll go back several decades because technology and machinery replacing people is not new. I mean, it goes back hundreds of years. You probably remember from, all of you probably took some history at one time, and you can remember the Luddites in England in the 1700s when technology was starting to replace people in the textile and apparel factories in England. And the people, workers revolted, and they stormed the factories at night and crashed the machines, et cetera. They viewed this as a threat to their jobs, as rightly they would. But we've had this going on for a long time. No matter how old you are, I think you can relate to that. But I think people always thought, well, that the second characteristic of people, the cognitive, that's going to be their savior. Machines can't think. Machines can't make decisions. Well, they can. At least we're developing the technology to do that. Now, it's obviously not the kind of thinking that we do. It's thinking based on having access to massive amounts of data that then the computer and the machine can assess when they're faced with a particular situation. They find in their data bank what's happened with that situation in the past based on the data, and then they can make a decision. Of course, this all happens in a split second. And so we look at, for example, autonomous vehicles. How are they able to drive? That's because they have all this data, sensing data. And for example, if the vehicle's coming close to another vehicle, the data bank's able to tell the controls, hey, in our past, this is where you had a crash. So here we need to adjust. And we're seeing, for example, advances here in terms of health sensors. And this is all tied, and some others, and this is all tied into what's broadly called artificial intelligence. And again, artificial intelligence is nothing more than build a machine, you have a computer, you have massive amounts of data that computer accesses, And in a faster time than it takes for me to snap my fingers, when the machine is confronted with a situation where a decision has to be made, they can instantaneously access that data that they have. They can call up the data that pertains to that situation. They know what's going to happen if you do A, B, or C, and they take the appropriate action. This is developing, I think, faster than many people would like, because I think it is a threat, a big time threat to people. Bottom line here is that we were already in an age where the labor market was being disrupted by both the ability of machines and technology to substitute for the physical traits of people, but increasingly machines and technology able to replace the cognitive traits. There was a research paper was published in 2013 by two British economists. And economists are not known for getting a lot of attention in terms of massive attention. I hope my students pay attention to me, and you obviously are, but I'm talking about in terms of the culture. These two guys, Fry and Osborne, their names are, I would argue probably attain rock star status, if you could use that term, for being economists, rock star status that most other economists can only dream of achieving. And they got that because they published a paper where they went through painstakingly all the major occupations. They looked at those occupations in detail. They looked at what was happening in terms of the development of technology and machinery. And then they assigned a percentage to those occupations, a percentage of jobs in those occupations that they, based on their analysis, thought could be replaced by these machines and technology. And they made their forecast over well, let's see, this, over about 45 years. The result that really caught the attention of everyone is that Fry and Osborne predicted that if you compare the occupation spread now, and this was 2013 when the paper was published, to where they predicted it would be in 2050, half of the occupations that existed in 2013 would largely be replaced by technology and machinery in 2050. That was just astonishing. As you can imagine, that got a lot of play. And I don't know that I would hang on to that number and say, in fact, there's been a lot of other studies that some have said those numbers are too high, some have said they're too low. But I think the point is we do live in a time where these changes are happening in the labor market, and it's very hard to keep up with them. It's very hard to know where. And I'll say a few things about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, the COVID-19 has taken all these trends that we've been having already in place to accelerate it. In fact, I can't remember who said this. I wish I did. I wish I was the first to say it. But someone recently said it's like 2020 is really 2030. And what they mean by that is we are at the place that we would have been in 2030 in terms of our discussion here of the labor market, as well as other things, but we're at the place now that we would have been without the virus in 2030. The virus has pushed out all these trends and accelerated all these trends. And obviously, one of the big things the virus has caused us to worry about is face-to-face contact, personal interactions. This is mainly why we had our shutdowns and our stay-at-home orders, is because we knew, or at least the health people knew, the virus was very contagious. We didn't want to overwhelm the healthcare system. We didn't want to, quite frankly, have a situation like the country went through in 1917 to 1919, the so-called Spanish flu. If you read about that, 500,000 people died. And of course, we were a country of about a third, or less than a third of the population. I think we're around 100 million then. 500,000 people died. Hospitals were all full up. People that got sick, they had to have these makeshift warehouses to lay out people. I actually lived through a version of this, and those of you who are in my age category, if you were born after in the 1950s, would live through this. We had something in 1957 or 58 called the Asian flu. It was a worldwide pandemic that killed 116,000 people in our country when it was all said and done. And we had half the population then as we do now. So it would be like killing what, 230,000 people. Hopefully we don't get to that level, although I guess some people think we can. So I think clearly this time around we wanted to take some action so that we didn't have those kind of death numbers. But anyway, this is one of the, I think, the long-lasting things that we're going to be concerned about for a long time: face-to-face contact, personal interactions. I think the workplace, other kinds of interactions people do, we're going to try to minimize that. And this has obviously led to my third bullet point there, the fact that remote is in. Remote working, which I'm doing right now with you, remote teaching, remote healthcare. Little story there. Shortly after the pandemic hit and the stay-at-home orders were issued by the governor, my wife had a minor medical thing, nothing like threatening. So we contacted our doctor, and she said, well, we're closed. I can't see you. But go to your portal. Unfortunately, it already set that up. Go to your portal, write your symptoms. This was actually a physical thing. My wife needed to send some pictures, which we were very proud of ourselves. We were able to do that because we're not tech people. And my wife was able to get all of that handled remotely, and she's fine now. So this, we think, is remote medicals in, et cetera. So this is obviously going to dramatically change the job market, dramatically change. I don't think restaurants will ever be, at least in the foreseeable future, will ever be like they were in the past. And probably restaurant employment will never be what it was in the past. So if you looked at my forecast there I gave you from the federal government, that was the top job gainer forecasted from North Carolina. Food prep, well, probably not. Don't know how much lower, but probably not. Gyms, there's a big question about, are gyms ever going to come back to the degree they were? Probably not. So clearly the COVID has really changed the trajectory of the job market and really put us in this uncertain area. Next slide. So implications for policymakers and for workers. I need to get my notes here because I can't see the bottom of this. So just hold on one moment. Here we go. We think, as I've already said, that the job market is going to be remixed, and we're going to have an acceleration of the trends that were ongoing. We think that advances in machinery and technology are going to march on. They're going to be a big part of that job remix. As I said, a new element is going to be the lasting impact of COVID. These are all going to have implications for the kinds of work we have, where we work, the kinds of products that were produced, the kinds of services that are offered, housing. I've already read, many people think that the types of houses that are going to be built will change. You're going to see real estate people out there saying, this house now is built for the post-COVID economy. We have separate rooms for offices for the parents. We have a separate room for educational services, the students or the children. Maybe we have a gym. This open concept in homes that's been around for so long is probably going to go away, some people say. Office work will change. We're probably going to have a reduction in the use of commercial office buildings. People may work at home 4 days and go into the office 1 day, something like that. That's going to affect the work-life balance. And then something I think is going to be very, very interesting to follow, and that is this going to change where we live? If, for example, viruses do their worst damage in dense areas, big cities, which at least this one has done, is that going to motivate people to consider living in less dense areas? And there's already some evidence that people are acting on that, which for North Carolina could mean that we could have a revival of interest of people, especially if they can work remotely, of people living in small towns and rural areas of North Carolina. As long as they have high-speed internet, that's going to be an issue. And as a footnote to that, I don't think high-speed internet in rural and small town areas is going to be provided by laying cable. I think where this is going to be solved is what Elon Musk is working on with SpaceX, and that is these low-lying satellites that will hover over large geographical areas. They will be providing the high-speed internet small town and rural areas. And many futurists think that's just around the corner. So hopefully that does occur. We can go to the next slide, please. I do want to point out that when you hear about the improvements in the job market, and we have had improvements in the job market in May, June, and July at the national level. We don't yet have the numbers for North Carolina for July. That will be, I have to check my calendar, either this Friday, I think it's going to be not this Friday, but next Friday. But we have seen improvements. And in fact, at the national level, about half the jobs that were lost have come back. But those are not necessarily the same kind of jobs. I want to make that clear. And I think that's indicated in the fact that people are still applying for unemployment. And you might say, well, why are we getting people continuing to apply for unemployment if jobs are coming back? It's because they're not necessarily the same kind of jobs. Point number 6 here that I've emphasized, the training of new workers and the retraining of existing workers is going to be crucial. I think this is going to be one of our biggest challenges over the next decade. I think decisions that Peter Hans makes at the UNC system level and his successor at the community college level, and in conjunction with our state leaders in education, state superintendent of education, the education board, all those are going to be crucial. The chamber, I think, have a critical role in that and advising them, but I think this is absolutely positively going to be crucial. It's going to be the big game changer for all states, including North Carolina, over the next several decades, this retraining that I think we're going to need to see. And in that regard, I don't think it's going to, we can have education as usual. You might find this surprising coming from someone who works at one of our top universities, for your university. But I think education is going to have to change. Not all of it will change, but I think a large part of education is going to have to change. And I'm primarily talking about education beyond high school. It's going to have to be faster. It's going to have to be focused. It's going to have to be affordable. And it's going to have to be emphasizing adaptability and flexibility in terms of the training provided. If you take someone who's 35 years old, let's say they've been working in one of these areas that's not coming back, they have a family, they've got to get retrained for something else. They can't take 4 years to go to college and get a degree. They maybe can't even take 2 years at a community college. They've got to get in, find something they want to do, they can get trained for fast, and get out. And I think a lot of this training probably will be in conjunction with existing businesses. So I see a lot of room here, a lot of need for apprenticeships. All right, next slide. I do want to mention, because I've spoken to various committees and groups of the Chamber numerous times, and I've alluded to this book that I now have, can proudly say, that's published. This is really the result of my 43-year career at NC State. When I do talks like this, particularly when I do Outlook talks, I'm often asked about issues of the day, things like government spending, taxes, income inequality, healthcare, immigration, you name it. And I finally put a book together. It took me about 3 or 4 years to do this, that I call Real Solutions, Common Sense Ideas for Solving Our Most Pressing Problems, and it is now available. And all the usual places, mostly online. You go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, so I commend that to your attention. Next slide. That may be it. Is that the, oh no, one more slide, a little humor here. So anyway, I hope you have found my presentation interesting. And I set a low bar here. I hope you have found it more interesting than did my cat named Buddy. Buddy gets bored very, very quickly, and he just tunes me out. And there's an example of Buddy tuning me out, where he rolls over on his back and sleeps. That's a sign for me to go off and do something else. Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure that we are set up for questions, but I'll stay here a few minutes and see if we are. Are we done?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Walden. We do have one question
Yes.
we would like to ask that came from the audience. What
Yes.
are the racial equity implications of these disruptive forces? What does that mean for the Black and Latino workers?
Well, if you look at the data, we do see, in general, a larger percentage of workers who are Latino and who are Black among the lower paying jobs. And so a lot of those jobs, I think, are going to be subject to replacement by technology and machinery. In fact, I just have somewhere here on my desk a paper, newly published paper from two economists at MIT, no slough institution, who I think the title of it is, are all low paying jobs going to disappear? And so they talk a lot about what I talked about here. And on one hand, they argue that's good. I mean, we want people to earn more. But on the other hand, they argue that, well, if someone who is at a lower paying area and they lose their job and they don't have an opportunity for retraining, more education, then they're going to be lost. So I think my answer goes hand in hand with my comment about one of our biggest challenges. I always hesitate to say the biggest because there are a lot of challenges. But one of our biggest challenges in coming decades in North Carolina is going to be to make sure we have an educational structure from K through 12, community college, four-year college, apprenticeships, private-public partnerships, an educational structure that is out there and cognizant of how the job market is being changed and being ready to give people of all backgrounds, especially though the ones you mentioned, of all backgrounds, to give them the opportunity to retrain for hopefully better paying jobs. So if we don't do that, I think we could have a situation where, unfortunately, we see unemployment rates among the Latino and Black populations actually go up and be worse than they were for other groups. So the key in my mind here, and it goes without saying, we obviously need to eliminate all discrimination, racism, et cetera, from any of these decisions. That goes without saying. But in terms of having the structure, the educational structure and opportunities ready, and I think we're not going to. I think we don't want to be passive here. I think we want to actually go out and try to find people who are in that situation. I think that's going to be the difference. That's going to be absolutely crucial for the improvement of everyone in our economy over the next several decades.